Marcus Licinius Crassus. In ancient Rome, Marcus Licinius Crassus decided he wanted to be legendarily wealthy. And boy, did he succeed. How did he do it? Well, let's just say he had a real nose for fire sales. Crassus would buy burning buildings at bargain prices and then use his private fire brigade to extinguish the flames. But all that wealth couldn't buy Crassus' military glory. In 53 BCE, he decided to lead a campaign against the Parthians, presumably because conquering barbarians looked better on a resume than opportunistic landlord. Crassus marched his army into the desert, confident that his wealth would somehow translate into military genius. But it didn't. At the Battle of Carrhae, the Parthians introduced Crassus to their famous Parthian shot, a move that involved shooting arrows while pretending to retreat. It was like a deadly game of, made you look, and Crassus fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. Crassus and his son met their end on the battlefield. You know, legend has it that the Parthians, with a flair for poetic justice, poured molten gold down Crassus's throat after his death. It just goes to show, all the money in the world can't buy you common sense, or apparently a decent battle strategy. Henry, Duke of Lancaster. In the 14th century, most nobles were busy perfecting their jousting techniques, but Henry of Grosmont, Duke of Lancaster, decided to diversify his portfolio. Born around 1310, Henry wasn't content with just being fabulously wealthy. He wanted to be fabulously interesting too. He juggled more titles than a Netflix series catalog. Earl of Lancaster? Check. Earl of Leicester? Why not? Duke of Lancaster? Absolutely. He collected titles like other nobles collected peasants' taxes. Henry became one of King Edward III's most trusted captains, probably because he was one of the few who could read a map without holding it upside down. Not satisfied with just military glory, Henry decided to become a founding member of the Order of the Garter. Now, how did he die? In 1361, after returning from abroad, probably exhausted from all that overachieving, Henry fell ill. On March 23rd, he checked out at Leicester Castle, likely due to the plague making its unwelcome sequel tour through England. Richard Fitzalan, 10th Earl of Arundel. Still in the 14th century, when England was busy picking fights with everyone, including itself, there lived a man named Richard Fitzalan, the 10th Earl of Arundel. Born with a silver sword in his hand and a chip on his shoulder, young Richard was determined to make his mark on history, preferably in someone else's blood. Growing up, Richard had a slight setback when his father lost his head, literally, in a political disagreement. But our Earl wasn't about to let a little thing like a family decapitation get him down. He sweet-talked his way back into royal favor, collecting titles like they were going out of style. Justiciar of North Wales, Constable of Portchester Castle, and High Sheriff of Carnarvonshire. Richard was a medieval LinkedIn influencer. But it was on the battlefield where Richard truly shined. He fought in Scotland because haggis wasn't punishment enough for the Scots. Then he joined the 100 Years' War, which, despite its name, wasn't nearly long enough for Richard's taste. He became so good at leading armies that the king made him sole commander in the north. But even the mightiest warriors can't fight off death or royal mood swings. In 1376, Richard found himself taking an extended, all-expenses-paid vacation in Pontefract Castle, also known as prison. There he met his untimely end, possibly by starvation. Whether he chose to fast as a form of medieval protest, or the king decided to put him on an extreme diet, remains a mystery. And if that's not bad enough, our next candidate ruled a quarter of the world's wealth, only to be undone by quarter-sized microbes. Akbar I. In the 15th and 16th century, while Europe was still figuring out indoor plumbing, Akbar the Great was busy ruling over a quarter of the world's wealth. This Mughal emperor controlled an empire valued at 25% of the global GDP. Akbar, whose name literally means great, lived up to it by extracting riches from his subjects with an efficiency that would impress even the most zealous tax collector. But even great emperors aren't immune to life's little ironies. In 1605, at the age of 63, Akbar met his match, not on the battlefield, but on the toilet. A nasty case of dysentery brought low the man who once stood atop a mountain of wealth. Stefan van Rensselaer. In the late 18th century, Stefan van Rensselaer III was born with a silver spoon so big it could have doubled as a boat. As heir to one of America's most lavish estates, young Stefan probably thought life was all manor houses and fancy hats. What he didn't know was that he'd end up leaving a legacy that was equal parts wealth, education, and ironically, a hint of revolution. Van Rensselaer wasn't content with just being rich. No, he had to go and be useful too. He joined the New York State Assembly and even became a major in the U.S. militia. One can only imagine the difficulty of maintaining a powdered wig in battle. But Stefan's crowning achievement? Founding the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Apparently, when you're that wealthy, you can just create universities on a whim. However, in 1839, at the age of 74, Stefan's story came to an abrupt end, courtesy of a gunshot wound just above his heart. John D. Rockefeller. John Davison Rockefeller was a pioneering oil magnate who founded Standard Oil, revolutionizing the petroleum industry. He turned Standard Oil into a money-printing machine by the 1880s, controlling 90% of U.S. refineries and pipelines. He could have bathed in crude oil if he wanted to, but instead, he decided to dole out $500 million to various causes. I guess he figured he couldn't take it with him when he kicked the bucket. Speaking of which, old John D. managed to outlive most of his contemporaries, finally succumbing to arteriosclerosis at the age of 97. He died peacefully in his sleep. John may have started in the oil business, but he finished it by becoming fossil fuel himself. Andrew Carnegie. Andrew Carnegie was a Scottish lad who built an empire on iron and ended up with a chest full of, well, fluid. This steel tycoon amassed a fortune equivalent to $372 billion today. Carnegie's rise to riches? Simple. He cornered the market on pointy metal sticks, aka steel, during America's Industrial Revolution. But don't worry, he wasn't all cold steel. He had a warm, gooey center. After selling his company for $480 million, chump change really, he decided to channel his inner Tony Stark and donate 90% of his fortune. Unfortunately, bronchial pneumonia struck him down in 1919. Some say his failed attempts at world peace weakened him. Who knew trying to stop wars could be hazardous to your health? Carnegie's legacy lives on through countless libraries and institutions. You know, nothing says, "Remember me," like forcing future generations to read in silence. Jay Gould. In the late 1800s, Jay Gould turned America's railroads into his personal cash cow. This crafty tycoon and his buddy James Fisk didn't just ride the rails, they owned them. And as if that wasn't enough, they decided to play Midas with the gold market too. Gould's fortune peaked at a whopping $71.2 billion in today's cash. But in 1892, at 56, Gould's ride came to a screeching halt. Tuberculosis caught up with him in his fancy Fifth Avenue digs. All that money couldn't buy him an extra breath. Marshall Field. Born on August 18, 1834, Marshall Field was a retail revolutionary who turned window shopping into an extreme sport. Field's department stores in Chicago were so fancy, they made the Gilded Age look like a dollar store clearance sale. Field built an empire on give the lady what she wants, but when death came a-knockin', there was no refund policy. Now how'd he check out? Unfortunately, Marshall caught his final markdown thanks to a New Year's Day golf game. Seems the only hazard he couldn't avoid was pneumonia. But at least he went out in style, probably wearing a three-piece suit from his own menswear department. Tragic much? Here's someone who died in an anonymous way? Frederick Weyer. Frederick Weyer was the German-American timber king who founded the Weyer Company, which grew to be one of America's biggest empires. With a fortune of $79.4 billion, money really does grow on trees, or at least by chopping them down. Old Fred passed away in 1914 at the age of 79 in Pasadena, California. Cause of death? Unknown. Perhaps he got bored or something. Anyway, his passing marked the fall of a great timber titan. One might say he finally met his matchstick. He left behind vast forests of green, both the leafy kind and the paper kind that folds neatly into wallets. With enough determination and a really big axe, you too can be obscenely wealthy. Over here, we have the iron fist of communism, short-circuited by faulty wiring upstairs. Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin, the red menace who turned the Soviet Union into his own piggy bank. This mustache-twirling tyrant controlled about 9.5% of the world's wealth. Stalin's accomplishments? Well, he industrialized the USSR faster than you can say gulag, and he was so good at central planning that he accidentally planned a famine. But all good things must come to an end, and for Stalin, that end came on March 5, 1953. After years of treating his body like a vodka-fueled stress ball, his brain finally said "niet" and burst like an overripe tomato. His cerebral hemorrhage was so massive, it probably registered on the Richter scale. The man who sent millions to their deaths couldn't find a doctor brave enough to treat him in his final hours. What did he expect? When you purge all the good medical professionals, you're left with quacks who think leeches cure communism. So the great Stalin, terror of the West, was defeated by his own blood pressure. How's that for a Red Scare? Sam Walton. In 1962, Sam Walton opened a small store in Arkansas. Little did the world know, this humble beginning would birth what is known as Walmart today. Despite amassing a fortune, Walton lived like he was perpetually stuck in the clearance aisle. He drove an old Ford pickup truck and pinched pennies so hard Lincoln probably felt it. This frugal lifestyle allowed him to focus on his true passion, revolutionizing retail and accidentally turning small-town America into a series of parking lots with stores attached. As Walmart grew, so did Walton's wealth, though you'd never guess it by looking at him. Sadly, even retail giants aren't immune to life's final markdown. In 1992, at the age of 74, Walton's price tag was punched by multiple myeloma. In true Walton fashion, he worked until the very end, reviewing sales data from his hospital bed. One could say he was committed to rollbacks right up to his own rolling out. History's richest players checked out in ways ranging from ironic to iconic. Moral lesson? Death is no respecter of net worth. Their legacies linger, but their ends remind us you can't take it with you, no matter how much it you've got. Well, until next time, keep climbing that wealth ladder, diversify your empire, and please go check your blood pressure today.